I finally got to see the movie Oppenheimer, and I also read the book which the movie is based on. Now, in the film, you get 3 hours of talking, and in between, you see the first atomic bomb test where the special effects crew apparently detonated a few plastic drums of gasoline. What a letdown. But that's not the worst aspect of the movie. Without the first-class actors, no studio would have approved the project, and the second major selling point was the supposed historical accuracy of these important events. Now, the common thread is left-wing activism, a thoroughly Leninist framing of the subject, and the superpowers. So the movie Oppenheimer, played by Cillian Murphy, is a suave man who understands not just physics better than almost anyone else, but also has a better moral compass and more advanced global view on security. Of course, the evil imperialist establishment thwarts his plans for limiting the bomb program and ousts him witch hunt style under the pretext of his fleeting left-wing contacts. The real Oppenheimer was an unstable lunatic who was surrounded by hardcore communists. Now, the Soviets were angry that they were lagging behind in their own nuclear program and that their spies in the West were eventually exposed. A propaganda campaign immediately started to defend Oppie, as he was called, to equate anti-communism with fascism and to complain that the United States should restrict its nuclear weapons program and place it under international supervision. Now, the film meets all the criteria of this left-wing activism. The real Oppie grew up like a little prince. He was privileged in every way and moved from one elite university to the next. His attempt to murder a professor with a poison apple is a strange side note in the film, while in reality some serious persuasion from the rich father was necessary to smooth things over. Oppie still suffered from severe depression, probably schizophrenia, some form of psychosis, and he also tried to strangle a friend with a belt. Now, the strangling is not in the movie. And they also distort the events surrounding the poisoned apple. So in the film, Oppie has second thoughts and he just removes the apple and puts it in a garbage bin, and that's the end of it. But in reality, this caused quite an incident. He was only able to continue his career because of his family was rich and powerful and his willingness to be treated by the best psychiatrists. So no criminal charges, nothing. From the outset, he was influenced by left-wing groups, and over time he surrounded himself with staunch communists. The fact that he received a security clearance is nothing short of a miracle. It was a very normal event that he later lost it after several spies were exposed and facts came to light about his own person, his own actions. But in the movie, he is the honorable martyr, the voice of reason, who is friends with Albert Einstein. But the real Oppenheimer found Einstein to be horrible. He called him a total lunatic. And that's even in the book. So if you actually read the book, you get, of course, the same left-wing activism, the same Leninist framing, but you get a ton of, background info and detail. And if you then compare this to other books and other data, you see a more complete picture, and it's quite scary. So, then you see the security chief at Los Alamos, the spy catcher. He was cast with a blue-eyed actor who tries hard to come across as Nazi-like. And we hear he had killed communists with his own hands in Russia. So the security guy talks with Oppenheimer, and later Oppie talks with this officer who's played by Matt Damon. Matt Damon's character tells him, you gotta be careful with this guy, the security chief, because he's this monster. Really? So this guy actually killed communists in a war in Russia. So that's not really unusual in the wake of the revolution and the Civil War. In the film, however, he represents fascism and imperialism in the purest kind of Leninist framing. Then, a young John F. Kennedy tries to sabotage the career of an official who wanted to unseat Oppie. That's the myth of the good leftist JFK, who was later murdered by the fascist conspiracy. In reality, JFK was strongly opposed to Soviet communism And he had many common enemies, and the whole cabinet was very, anti-communist and very established. You can find a video on this channel about John F. Kennedy and his cabinet. So, but they try to frame it in this gigantic narrative. So anybody who opposes the fascist conspiracy gets ousted or even murdered, assassinated. Right? So this happened right after the JFK assassination. So the left tried to control the narrative. And the truthers then adapted this sort of narrative and had their own spin on it, of course. So also that's in the movie. So if you read the book on which the movie is based, the suspicion becomes very clear that Oppie himself may have been spying. Now, all this other data we have on Oppenheimer suggests that he was indeed very much connected to the Communist Party, and he brought communists into Los Alamos. He tried to protect himself, but it was not enough ultimately to nail him as a traitor. But it was surely enough to remove him from sensitive positions and just revoke his security clearance. I mean, this was just very, very normal. But in the movie, he's the martyr. In the movie, it's all unfair. It's all a conspiracy against him, right? So he had this remote ranch and his many contacts, so was enough opportunity to meet with spies and hand over information. Early on, he was an active member of the Society for Ethical Culture of Felix Adler. That movement was international. So the movement in England spawned the very left-wing Fellowship of the New Life and the Fabian Society, sort of the breeding ground for modern Western socialism. Even Albert Einstein was a supporter of the ethical culture movement. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was a regular attendee at the New York Society for Ethical Culture. And Mr. Felix Adler echoed Marx and Lenin by saying the following: "The root disease that afflicts the world at the present day is the supremacy of the commercial point of view." Okay, well, in real-life socialism, they also had to calculate things. How much can we actually afford, to make weapons, to produce goods for the people, and who gets what. So they had to be very, very commercial in a sense, right? They had to gauge supply and demand and calculate everything. But this is sort of the teenage level garbage voiced by Felix Adler, as if he could pinpoint the root cause of evil in that way. It's trade. It's the right to own things and to accumulate wealth and to trade it to make these voluntary contracts and so on. In a summer camp, a young Oppenheimer was viciously bullied by some of the boys. Some say he was even tortured. He ratted out some of the boys, and his father got involved, and then these boys took revenge. Maybe this caused some psychological damage, which we saw later. Maybe this also motivated him to spy for the Soviets because he believed communists were building a better world. At Cambridge, he was collapsing multiple times, suffered from depression. After he tried to poison his mentor, he was diagnosed with a form of schizophrenia or psychosis. He even tried to strangle a friend with a belt, and he almost killed a woman while he was driving recklessly, which was a regular occurrence. So that's the real Oppie. He's not the suave, guy in the movie, played by Cillian Murphy. He befriended Friedrich Georg Hutermans, who had been a member of the German Communist Party since the 1920s. After the election of Adolf Hitler in 1933, he went to Great Britain near Cambridge. And in 1935, Hutermans emigrated to the Soviet Union and took an appointment at the Kharkov Physico-Technical Institute. He was ultimately arrested by the NKVD intelligence service in December of 1937, and he claimed to be a German spy under torture. Later, he worked for the Nazis in the field of nuclear physics. Oppie's student and close collaborator on the Manhattan Project, Robert Serber, married the communist Charlotte Löw, who was appointed by Oppenheimer to head the technical library at Los Alamos. So American intelligence was gathering information from all over the world concerning physics. So this material flowed to Los Alamos, and she had the key. She had the oversight. She knew what information was coming in. Head of Technical Library at Los Alamos, she was never a member of the Communist Party herself, unlike her brother and sister. And between 1946 and 1948, the FBI wiretapped her phone and opened her mail. Oppie, also Mr. Oppenheimer, rented an apartment from the Communist Party member Mary Ellen Washburn, who held fundraisers for the communist-backed Spanish Republicans. He met with Harry Bridges. He had an affair with the communist Gene Tadlock, who introduced him to Rudy Lambert and Thomas Addis. Now, Lambert first fell under FBI scrutiny in connection with his com-intern apparatus investigation. Lambert is named in a 1945 San Francisco KGB cable intercept, which was deciphered by the Venona Project. And these communications were discussing information about uranium deposits in Western states. And the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission found Oppie to be very deceitful. He was straight up lying. So it says, in 1943, Dr. Oppenheimer indicated to Colonel Lansdale that he did not know Rudy Lambert, a Communist Party functionary. In fact, Dr. Oppenheimer asked Colonel Lansdale what Lambert looked like. Now, however, Dr. Oppenheimer, under oath, has admitted that he knew and had seen Lambert at least half a dozen times prior to 1943. He supplied a detailed description of Lambert. He said that once or twice he had lunch with Lambert and Isaac Volkov, another Communist Party functionary, to discuss Oppenheimer's contributions to the Communist Party, and that he knew at the time that Lambert was an official in the Communist Party. I mean, you are working on these highly sensitive matters, but you're meeting with these communists, and then he plays dumb. In the movie, you see Miss Tadlock assassinated, a favorite conspiracy theory of the left. You get actually more than one version of her death. You know, in one version, she's killing herself in the bathtub. In another version, she is assassinated. Mr. Oppenheimer played down his connections. He said, she was, as it turned out, a friend of many fellow travelers and communists, with a number of whom I was later to become acquainted. I should not give the impression that it was wholly because of Gene Tadlock that I made left-wing friends or felt sympathy for causes which hitherto would have seemed so remote from me, like the loyalist cause in Spain and the organization of migratory workers. But he actively brought suspicious people into the Manhattan Project. That's more than just dinner party talk and Marxist musings. His own brother was a Communist Party member. So was his brother's wife. Oppenheimer was a member at Berkeley of what he called a discussion group, which was later identified by fellow members Hakon Chevalier and Gordon Griffiths as a closed secret unit of the Communist Party for Berkeley, the Berkeley faculty. The FBI opened a file on Oppenheimer in March 1941. It recorded that he attended a meeting in December 1940 at Chevalier's home that was also attended by the Communist Party's California State Secretary William Schneiderman and his treasurer Isaac Volkov. The FBI had wiretaps in which Communist Party members referred to him or appeared to refer to him as a communist, as well as reports from informers within the party. Oppie falsely blamed George Eltonton for spying. So he tried to throw the FBI or the other guys off the trail. This is serious stuff. Oppenheimer testified that some of his students, including David Bohm, Giovanni Rossi Lomanitz, Philip Morrison, and others, had been communists at the time they had worked with him at Berkeley. And you don't see any of the gruesome realities of the Soviet regime in the film, and it's almost as if a communist had written the script. In principle, counterintelligence against communists is always presented as a witch hunt in order to remove obstacles from US imperialism. It's always a conspiracy. We briefly learn about the spy Klaus Fuchs in the movie as if his betrayal was excusable or would restore the balance of power. It would make the world a better place. So you briefly see a glimpse of this guy. Oh, Mr. Fuchs. Hey, what's Fuchs doing? And then you get to hear, oh, Fuchs was a spy for the Soviets. Oops. And there's a whole interesting backstory in the book Trinity, where Fuchs had many communist connections. He fled Germany, went to Britain, and he was cleared again and again, which is highly suspicious. And then he was allowed to go to the United States and work on the Manhattan Project. And the Brits told the Americans, this man is safe. We vetted him multiple times. It's okay. Of course, this was one of the biggest intelligence failures of all time. And this leads us into this whole issue of Britain being compromised, up to probably the head of the MI5, and even guys like Lord Louis Mountbatten. You can find a video on this channel about the biggest mole inside NATO. And then you see Albert Einstein in the movie. He was also a communist and was therefore not allowed near the Manhattan Project. This context is missing in the film. And they fabricate a nice relationship between Einstein and Oppenheimer, even though Oppenheimer really didn't like him. He just called him a total nutcase. So woke Hollywood has struck again here in the most insidious way. Implicitly, everything is permeated by toxic masculinity, as if real communism was not dominated by men, or as if the United States was guided by simple emotions and ambitions. Now, this is also something you would see in other movies, anti-war movies, even Dr. Strangelove, where the military guys are always viewed as fascists and nutcases and psychotics and that sort of thing. Now, today's pro-Russian right could celebrate the film Oppenheimer just as much as the left, because it's always the same framing. If the Russians are behind something, it's good. And if the Russians, they get a problem, then it's a huge conspiracy, and we all have to whine about it. Visually, the film falls short of its potential. Some scenes look completely unnatural and ugly. It would have been better to use computer effects for the nuclear explosion to get a better understanding of how this thing worked and what the effect was. Instead, it looks like a few ignited plastic barrels of gasoline. It's a huge letdown. You also do not see the effects of the nuclear bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They have this scene where Oppenheimer is in a crowded room and it's very loud and the music becomes eerie and it's sort of echoing what, the effects of the bombing. There's nothing really going on musically. It's very boring. It's a 3-hour-long costume film full of drivel. So Hollywood might as well close down and we wouldn't miss anything. And even Nolan's Interstellar movie was already an anti-capitalist global warming film. Now, remember, Karl Marx predicted that capitalism would go through these stages, turn into this centralized thing, all these monopolies, and then it would turn into this maniacal imperialism trying to save itself, but this would ultimately fail and destroy the planet. And this, of course, never happened that way. Of course, you had centralization and you had these government structures, attached to it, and you had the military-industrial complex, but the prediction of Karl Marx never came true. And then when Lenin wrote his seminal text on imperialism and capitalism, he thought along the same lines, but you never saw this collapse of capitalism. But in the movie Interstellar by Mr. Nolan, the director of Oppenheimer, in Interstellar you see this prediction come true. They're not explicit about it, but it's pretty much that. Capitalism has destroyed the Earth, and now we need a new Earth. So the conservatives have ruined the planet, and now the heroes have to fix everything. It's a very strange director, Mr. Nolan. He and his wife, they have this production company, and they had this weird Russian guy featured, and they had this film made. And I'm gonna look more into this whole affair. But the movie and this book is basically a Soviet interpretation of the whole thing. And there's also another level to this. It's sort of the esoterics. I mean, you saw this in Interstellar when these interdimensional beings, they communicate with the humans, and the main character, Cooper, ends up in this tesseract, hypercube, multidimensional thingy-majingy. And so these beings, they help us and they save us. It's sort of based on science, but it's also very esoteric, which was apparently interesting to Mr. Nolan. And you see kind of the same thing in the book about Oppenheimer. There was this one event where Oppie was doing something. He was spending some time in a certain place, and this totally transformed him. he became a Buddhist, and he was interested in all these old Sanskrit texts. And he would never really reveal what had happened to him, what transformed him. And it's likely he tried psychedelic drugs, probably under supervision of professionals, because remember, he was, working with the best psychologists in the country. And there was this network of shrinks that were experimenting with psychedelics early on. And this is also the same network which then infiltrated the military. And that's when you had guys like General Stubblebine, transforming. He was apparently very depressed after Vietnam. He was a Hall of Famer military intelligence man, very staunch anti-communist. He was depressed, and then he probably took some psychedelics, and he tried to work on these esoteric projects in the military, remote viewing and all that. Made a video about that on this channel, and this ultimately destroyed his career. So he was taken out of the game, and it's likely this was some sort of a communist operation. And so, OP was very unhappy. Oppenheimer, he had trouble making real friends, and he was a very strange, psychotic man. But the communists, they really worked on him, apparently. And so he was transformed, and he loved them, and he was doing his best to associate himself with communists, and ultimately he lost his security clearance. Now, you have to be very careful with this sort of propaganda, because it's sort of a carpet. It's a broad approach, trying to reach as many people as possible. And then when something important happens, a narrative about this event is constructed based on the old baseline propaganda that was spread. And so people get the wrong idea about events, or people actually turn traitors. They get recruited, or they offer their services, for Russia or whatever, because they believe it's the right thing to do. Saving the Western world from fascism or whatever, whatever you might want to call that. So, terrible movie. If you just want to watch it as a piece of entertainment, it's horrible. It's 3 hours of talking, and you get to see this, this lame explosion. So it's not really worth your time. You may want to read some books, maybe not this one, but there's some other good books on, especially Klaus Fuchs. The book, I think it's called Trinity. You get more out of this. It's cheaper than the movie if you go to a cinema with your wife or whatever. The book is cheaper. You get more out of it, and you get closer to the actual reality of things, because the movie is just pulling you into this large, grand fantasy. All right, please like this video, subscribe to this channel, comment, share, and check out my ebook on old intelligence networks in Enlightenment and Communism.